This talk is called Ethical Community Building, or How to Build With, Not For. My name's Jeanne Brooks. I'm a community organizer and an experienced designer and an RJI non-residential fellow. I also like to call myself a democracy warrior, and everything that I do from the heart. So here are some of the places where I've sort of honed my skills as in audience engagement. And some of my most successful strategies have been one, building with, not for the community. This success has been realized in the form of growing our audience, deepening engagement, and increasing monetization. So at ONA, for example, I grew our social communities by over 600% while I was there. As part of a team that helped to make that happen. We also launched and experimented with new platforms and sort of played around with ways that we could develop community-driven strategies for the programs that we were producing. We were intentional about dramatically increasing diverse participation by focusing on inclusive strategies for engagement. So we did this by diversifying our staff, foregrounding diverse community members with our content, and constantly seeking dialogue and sometimes really challenging feedback in ways to improve. As a result, we nearly doubled the size of the conference during my tenure, attracting more sponsors and more supporters. What we did was really develop a bottom-up engagement for how to build with, not for your audience. So first, I need to give credit where credit is due. This talk stems from a conversation that I've been having with a couple of folks. Lauren Ellen McCann is a civic technologist, and she's actually the one that coined this term, build with, not for. Also, we've been having the conversation with Josh Stearns. He is the Director of Journalism and Sustainability at the Dodge Foundation, and after he was so inspired by Lauren Ellen's talk, she being a civic technologist, he decided to fork that for journalism. And sort of these strategies, really what this did was kind of give us some language to talk about strategies that we've been espousing for years. My goal today is sort of to take what they've shared so far with building inclusive participatory technology and help us better integrate this into our ever-evolving code of ethics for journalism. So I'm just going to say I can't recommend highly enough that you check out everything that both Josh Stearns and Lauren Ellen have written on Medium, and I'd be happy to tweet out those links after. I'm going to recognize that these theories are a little bit radical, right? We're going to push some of you outside of your comfort levels. It's a little bit different than what you're used to in journalism, although you're not alone, is what I have to say. So first, let's define ethics, right? Ethics is a code of thinking and a behavior governed by a combination of personal, moral, legal, and social standards of what is right. So although the definition of right varies sometimes with situations and cultures. And before that, let's move into something, a code of ethics that I think many of us are familiar with, I hope, which is the Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics. In their preamble, I just want to read it for you. They say, members of the Society of Professional Journalists believe that public enlightenment is the forerunner of justice and foundation of democracy. Ethical journalism strives to ensure the free exchange of information that is accurate, fair, and thorough. An ethical journalist acts with integrity. So another really important project to be paying attention to is the Ona DIY Ethics Code. And this is being led by Tom Kent of the AP. And really what they're trying to do is give journalists a framework as technology is ever evolving for how you can build your own ethics code within your newsrooms, right? There's many that exist in journalism, but we all do things differently. Each of our newsrooms has different strategies and processes, and we all need to adapt accordingly. So I definitely recommend, this is a work in progress. It launched last year, and you can go to the site, you can access the project, and you can contribute yourself. And I'm looking forward to seeing how that project continues to evolve. So where does this come into community engagement? We can even start with the title of this talk, and part of this is constantly rethinking and keeping ourselves in check. We're iterating constantly, right? So I'm used to the terminology of community building, but I got a little bit of pushback from Lauren Ellen McCann, who said, our work as journalists is not to build a community or to tell people what they should care about, but rather it's to share important information with people. So we may be saying that what we want to do is build community, but actually what we want to do is build engagement. Community is not a meaningful unit of measurement for engagement. It's amorphous. What we need to do is be identifying ways that we can bring our information to the communities in the context that they choose. So as we seek to provide a fair and comprehensive account of events with thoroughness and honesty, it is ever more important that we continue to adapt the ways that we understand our communities and support the news. So here's a chart, and I'm going to give credit here to Joy Mayer and also to Meg Picard. They created this together, I'm going to say, or the information comes from Meg Picard, and Joy is the creator of the actual chart. And this, I think, really speaks very highly, right? This is the traditional way that we're used to seeing news produced. Sort of pre-publication, you have a journalist and they do all of this work, and the user, or as I like to say, the audience, they're not really thought of yet until then it gets published and the journalist drops off sometimes. And that's when the audience begins to start to engage with this piece, and they're consuming and they're reacting and they're sharing. But as this very astutely points out, there's a lot of untapped potential there. And there's also a lot of opportunity for us to discover new ways around our reporting and new ways to integrate that reporting into the community. Our job in serving public information needs must identify the people our work is intended to benefit. And we're not actually building community because people are already there. Oftentimes we run out there chasing a story and we don't even understand who our audience is, what their needs are, or how we can best serve them. So this is not to say that everyone is operating this way, right? There's a lot of really fantastic examples out there, and we've seen many of them in the past 2 days here, from international and national reporting with AJ Plus to investigative reporting with the Center for Investigative Reporting, and much of the work that they do, but some that I'm most enamored with is their collaborations with the Off-Page Project, and localized content that we're seeing with, for example, Jennifer Brandel's Curious Cities. So we must first understand who our audience is before we can develop the strategies to inform them and engage them. And more times than I care to count, when I've gone into newsrooms to help them figure out their engagement strategy, my first question is always, who is your audience? And 90% of the time, the answer is everyone, everywhere. Or it is a laundry list of basically everyone, everywhere. And that's not really a way to devise your strategy. It just makes things way too big for you to actually serve that kind of need. So we need to rethink these broad distribution strategies. As the internet gives rise to myriad ways to connect and communicate with one another, we have the opportunity to not just give voice to audiences in new and exciting ways, but to design and develop experiences that are more valuable and compelling. What we're seeing right now is a shift from top-down, one-directional content production to bottom-up, multi-directional content experiences. These are experiences that we can build with the community, not for. So news institutions have the opportunity to serve as a platform that connects users who act as content creators, distributors, consumers, critics, and collaborators. We must embrace that we're living in a time of experimentation. So there's no silver bullet for how journalism will survive, and there is no one-size-fits-all description for how to succeed. With the rapid pace of technology, we are constantly iterating and prototyping, and to do that with accuracy, we need to embark on deeper listening and empathy around the information that we're providing. News has traditionally been driven by an ethos that trust is built on reputation, leaving little room for failure. But this is in direct conflict with the rising ethos of technology design, where innovators are encouraged to fail often and fast. The truth is, no engagement strategy will reach everybody, but we can't make informed decisions about who to target and how if we don't get comfortable with the need for design for inclusion, but the understanding that real inclusion involves a give and a take. So it involves exploring head first our own personal bias and seeking out and confronting our unconscious bias. It involves going into communities that we're covering and engaging in a dialogue. We're living in an era where confronting racism in our society in ways that we've never been able to before. And that's an opportunity for us to have a conversation about what these differences mean. No longer is an all-white staff acceptable in your newsroom, and leading strategies will be reflective of your ability to accurately cover a community. So this is, we might want to engage a strategy for our news that particularly motivates creators or critics, but without mindfulness about who currently feels welcome to engage with the information, we need to be aware of who we're inviting into this space and who is being left behind. Whose voices are rising to the top, and how accurate are those depictions of events and issues? Are we really seeking truth as comprehensively and accurately as we can, or are we missing critical perspectives in covering the news? And this is where I love this quote. So Lauren Ellen McCann has also coined the phrase the speed of inclusion. And that is where we need to be operating right now. Public enlightenment is the forerunner of justice and the foundation of democracy. So if the end goal is a functional democracy, we have to operate at this speed of inclusion. We need to shift from top-down, one-directional content to embracing multi-directional content, bottom-up engagement. And it starts with trust. So these strategies don't come in a box or a little neat package that we can just insert into our newsroom workflows. They're messy, they're complicated. There's a lot of work that we have to do. It means taking risk and embarking on uncomfortable conversations, but I promise you it's worth it. Here's some steps that Josh Stearns has laid out on how to start building trust within your community. The first one is building with demands openness. So frequently, journalists go into communities with a set of assumptions and focus on deficits, but instead we need to enter these communities by listening and acknowledging their ideas. Building with means not importing models. So we often enter these spaces with a predetermined view of how we're going to serve that audience, right? We fall in love with the strategies that we've created internally, only to find that we go out into the community and it doesn't actually serve them the way we thought it might. Building with is intimate, it's personal, it's complex. So I said this earlier, but there's no one-size-fits-all experience, and this shift will require a deep and personal investment. Moving at the speed of inclusion means actively confronting our conscious and unconscious bias and taking steps to better include communities for which we are covering. That is really personal, right? That's very hard for us to do. But it's the hard work that we need to do as journalists to be serving these communities. In a case study provided by Josh Stearns, Jeremy Hay, who is a Knight Journalism Fellow at Stanford University and a New Yorker covering local news in the Bay Area, he said this: "Communities own and are their news, even if they lack news coverage and feel differently about news organizations than most institutions. News is the skin, flesh, bones, and blood of a community. It reflects a place, influences it, tells in public an ongoing story about it." Now that's a big responsibility, and it requires deep trust. The road for building trust is a long one, and it doesn't end the minute your story goes online. So building with communities means knowing your place. You not only need to develop critical knowledge that leverages community assets and responds to community needs, you also need to enter those spaces with self-awareness, humbleness, and empathy. So lastly, building with, not for, is not just an ethical imperative. It's also a survival strategy. So this is a rising theme with some of this event's discussions, right? We had David Germano earlier concluded that engagement will be a way of doing business. Asif Khan from the Location-Based Marketing Association, he ended his talk yesterday talking about how technology that is changing the way that people stay connected and interact with content brands, right? We got wowed with some of the crazy technologies that he was sharing. But what we're seeing is we're returning full circle, right? news discussion and engagement used to be held at the pubs, as he so astutely pointed out. I'm from New Hampshire, right? So you go there during election season, that's exactly where the conversation is taking place. And you're seeing the development of our technology sort of embracing that, right? Even looking at some of the new platforms that have launched recently. You have Periscope or YouNow or some of the hottest new tools. Some of the most exciting things about those tools are the ways that people can interact in that, right? Live streaming news is a hot medium, and Periscope, in my opinion, is so exciting because you can have a conversation right within the platform. You can express your you can connect with other people. And so our news and engagement strategies should always reflect this shift. By building our news, our engagement strategies, and our new technologies with, not for, the community, we'll discover new ways of connecting and open up opportunities for transformative news as the forerunner of justice and the foundation of democracy. Any questions?
Wow. I think that was really, really great. Very, very good. Hang on.
Hi, Jeanne. Awesome job. I had a question because I was really inspired by the whole build with, not for, but also who is excluded. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about communities built on social, because I think that's a challenge definitely as we're looking at building community, is who's on Twitter, who's on Facebook, Instagram, and I just wondered how you felt about building there or even online versus, doing something else, and the kind of advantages, disadvantages to that.
Yeah, well, I think that's why it's really important for us to define our audience before we're going into these things, right? Because, maybe your Facebook page is where you have the most amount of followers, but is that really the space where people are who need the information that you're putting out? And if not, where are they? And can you find them and bring it to them? There's a lot of people who need access to news who aren't on social media, or they don't have smartphones. So how are we thinking about serving their needs in these strategies, right? I think actually that question coming from you at the Center for Investigative Reporting, you talked yesterday about how postcards are part of your engagement strategy, right? And that's really meeting the needs of your community and taking things to where they are. So kudos to you right back.
I've got a question, actually two questions. One is, I like the sound of speed of inclusion, but I'm not sure I know what it means. Can you define that?
Sure. So I think what it means is that we need to constantly be evolving. Just the way that we're prototyping our technologies, we need to constantly be keeping ourselves in check of who is invited into the space and who are we leaving behind. And that needs to actively be part of the rapid pace of our technology design.
And the other question I had was, are you familiar with the Trust Project that Google and Markula Center for Ethics are pursuing?
No.
Well, I'd love to talk to you about that afterwards.
Great.
It seems like there's a strong connection between what you're working on and what they're trying to do.
Beautiful.
So,
I'd love to talk with you more.
Along the point that you were just mentioning, do you have something? We had some Syrian journalists visiting, and I have this sort of thing that I do on rapid iteration multi-platform. It's all about technology, and they said that's all well and good, but right now we're doing our news on mimeographs in the war zones that we're in, because technology doesn't make a lot of sense in the world that we're in.
Yeah.
I'm obviously a fan of everything you just said. And this question could go to anyone in the room, quite frankly, because I think what we all know the reality is the way, that model that you showed of how journalism is done, the idea of deep listening, of going out into community. We used to call it trolling when I was a reporter, not looking for a story, but actually just looking to listen, and find out not just what's happening, why it's happening, what can we do about it. So how are we going to change that culture? How are we going to change what we think of news is to focusing on what the community information needs are? And I seriously don't have any of that figured out, and I'm looking for, I don't know, answers or just ideas, like how are we going to change this culture?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to change cultures, right? But it starts with each individual. It starts by continuing a conversation, constantly keeping ourselves in check. Yeah, and really committing to deep listening, exploring, constantly asking questions about what we don't know.
Real quickly, online on Twitter, please ask her to speak more about diversifying staff coverage in light of different folks being in different digital places.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to. You know, the fact of the matter is that white reporters go out and they talk to white reporters, and black reporters go out and they talk to or black citizens. You know, it just is a natural way of the way that our communities develop. And maybe there are rare instances where that is different, but generally not. So what that means is that if your newsroom is not reflective of the community that you're covering, then you have some serious blind spots to how you're covering them. And I'm gonna push you to think a little bit about how accurate your coverage is if you're not including those very important voices in your reporting.